Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to do a little bit different of a video. It is about BYU, but don't worry, this is not a sports video. You don't have to watch sports to appreciate this. I'm going to be looking at something that just happened with BYU, and I'm going to examine maybe the spiritual undertones of this story. So stick with me. This is not about football. It's not about any of that. Um, if you haven't already, please subscribe, like this video if you end up liking it, hit the notification bell, and please do leave comments. So, first of all, you guys, I am not a sports person. I've enjoyed like football in the past, not so much college football, mostly the NFL, and I've appreciated it. When I was in high school, I played football. I was also into wrestling, and I also played rugby because my school had a rugby club. So, I like sports, but I've never become like a big sports fanatic. I'm not the type to really do um, fantasy leagues or, memorize everybody's stats. I mean, maybe when I was like younger, when I was playing those sports, I watched like ESPN and stuff like that, but I was never really too big into it. My family they were always for BYU, and I kind of was too, but then later, when I realized that I would probably be going to the University of Utah, I kind of, supported the University of Utah, but I didn't make it that far. I had a course correction, which has led me to this point in my life. But had I continued on into accounting, that's what I was originally um, getting my major in. I would have gone to the University of Utah. So, um, so something interesting happened today. Okay, and I think that there's a spiritual undertone, maybe spiritual patterns that we can kind of pick out of this story. And yes, it could just be looking into things, but I think the Lord does do a lot of like patterns in life, right? He does a lot of things that where you can find patterns. It's not all just like coincidence. Um, and while this may not be the biggest story in the world, there's a couple interesting things that I'd like to point out. And so, maybe just keep an open mind. But so BYU has just got accepted into the Big 12. That's a sports conference, essentially. Um, for those of you that follow sports, of course, I don't need to explain that to you. But if you don't really follow sports, you have the entire nation and all the universities, and there's these different conferences. And for BYU, okay, now look at this, okay? So BYU, I guess the first conference they were in was the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference from 1922, 1937. And here we have a map. So it looks like it included South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. Of course, not all the colleges in those states, but maybe just one or possibly more. But these were the states that had colleges that were in that conference, right? So in 1938, they went to the Skyline Conference, and now we have just kind of like these mostly mountain states: Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, right? And then now this is basically what I was always familiar with when I was younger, the WAC, Western Athletic Conference, and that was a little bit more widespread. You got Washington, California, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and then Illinois. Excuse me. And then after that, they went to the Mountain West Conference at the turn of the millennium, and that map looks like this. So all just kind of like centered around Utah, California, Nevada, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico. That's the WAC. I don't know if. Oh yeah, there was. I can't remember the university, but Hawaii had a team, if I recall, and that's why I don't know why it's colored in red, but I do seem to recall that they had a team in the Mountain West Conference or the WAC. Is it colored here? No, Mountain West Conference. Okay, anyway, that's not the point. Um, okay, now After that, something interesting happened in the year 2011, no less, because one of the themes of my channel has been some of the interesting numbers that have to do with the second coming and just with the gospel. And it seems like 11 and also recently 22 seem to be numbers of significance. I'm not exactly sure why or what they mean. Um, I've had some spiritual, basically experiences or answers to prayers that have involved 11. Um, Nothing like too big. I'm not like talking about numerology or anything like that, but it's just interesting from 2011 to 2022, they were independent, and they still are until next year. So for 11 years, that's how long they were independent. Um, yeah, I'm not going to go into the number part. You can watch my other videos, and I talk about that just a little bit more. And when they were independent, so that's when they were in a stage when it was kind of like, you know how I believe Notre Dame, they're independent. You have Army, Navy. I think there's like I pulled that map up here too. So here's like states that have independent schools in them. So so they were independent and they are independent until next year. Now today they got accepted into the Big 12 conference. Now here's where things get interesting. If you look at all these maps here, you see that they've always been associated with these like Western states, right? Sometimes more mountainous, other times, including parts of the West Coast, and then even going all the way out to Hawaii. But then they left all that and they were by themselves. They weren't in a conference. They were independent. And now uh, they're going to the Heartland, and I think that there could be some kind of significance with that, simply because we know that Jackson County, it's in Missouri, but here you have Kansas. That's where I'm at. And Kansas has two schools that are in the Big 12. And these are close to Jackson County. If you hop over here, here's Kansas, and Kansas City is right on the state line. You actually have Kansas City, Missouri, and you also have Kansas City, Kansas, which is over here. But usually when you're talking about Kansas City, you're talking about the Missouri portion of it. That's where the Kansas City Chiefs play and all that stuff. But both Missouri and Kansas share essentially Kansas City. And Jackson County is right here. It encompasses mostly the eastern part of the metro area, eastern and southeastern part. In the north part of it, that's where you have Independence, and we know that that's the location that was intended for the temple for New Jerusalem, right? And as far as I know, that's still the case. I say that just because there's people like Walter Palmer that think that Salt Lake City is the New Jerusalem, and I tend not to agree with that, but it could be. But I'm sticking with Missouri in Jackson County. Jackson County is the site somewhere. It's been revealed that this is the site of Eden, or at least eastward in Eden. I'm not sure. Maybe this part of over here in Kansas, maybe Kansas westward in Eden. I'm not sure. But the point is, if you go back in time, okay, and you think about, I don't want to say necessarily politics, but you can think of political maps. You can also just think of the concentrations of people that are more religious or more, I guess, spiritual, more conservative, more, traditional values that align a lot better with the church. This has always been kind of like a strong area, as well as the South and everything like that. But over time, that's changed. Nowadays, I don't know when it happened. California has probably always been more on the worldly side. But I don't think that's always been the case with the Intermountain states until recently. And we see that things are changing, and now the more religious and Christ-minded type of people, they're mostly going to be found here in the heartland of the U.S. and probably the South. Of course, there's good people everywhere, and I'm not saying that all of California is bad and all of New York and Washington and stuff, but you know, you think about things that have happened, like these three states right here, along with Nevada, they're consistently nowadays going for values that contradict the church and church doctrines. Um, Colorado, I can't remember if they were the first one to legalize marijuana, but I know for a long time it was Colorado and Washington, and of course here in Vegas you got Sin City down here, which is also there's a sizable LDS community in Vegas, and I love Vegas. That's where my some of my in-laws live. But I think as time has gone on, as I've witnessed things like these areas and it's starting to kind of filter in through here, are becoming more and more secular, including Utah. I'm going to say it. It seems like if you're a saint or if you're in these LDS communities here, um, things are changing because now the pressure is on more and more to conform to the ways of the world. And I think, especially in Utah and these places, it's becoming harder to be both LDS but also look cool or, uh, be accepted by, um, what the mainstream is pushing, essentially. And I've done videos how it seems like every day that goes by, the wheat and the tares uh, are every day they look less and less like each other. Back in the 80s, maybe not so much. Back in the 90s, still. But nowadays, it's just like becoming more and more apparent, I think, um, who the tares are and who the wheat is. And these areas that you thought were so, strong with the church, people I think are starting to show their true colors, and they're starting to go along with Babylon. And I could be wrong about that, but I get the sense from all the people that I talk to, what I see in the news, on Facebook, on YouTube, just talking to people that I know, it seems like that's the general consensus, I would say. Um, so basically, you have this kind of timeline here where the church was very strongly headquartered in Utah, and it still is. And this was a pretty good region of the country. But as time has gone on, it's gotten worse. I'd say pretty much all these states here are now in spiritual jeopardy. And you have this region here, the Heartland, that is still really true to its values as a whole when you look at all the people that live here. And you also kind of you're starting to see, I think, a migration, definitely a migration from California and maybe some of these other states, Washington and Oregon, as home prices have gone up and the cost of living and all that stuff. A lot of them have started to migrate to the western part of the U.S., east of them, but these mountainous states. And from what I've seen, this is just anecdotal evidence, but I've seen a lot of people that have been moving from these states over here to the Midwest. You know, um, I'm part of that, and it looks like, at least as far as BYU's athletic affiliations go, they're moving that way as well. And now they're going to be playing mostly here in the Midwest. We got Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and then West Virginia. So it's interesting. Now, at the same time, you have the University of Utah that, okay, if you're not familiar with Utah, basically, it's kind of weird. In the Salt Lake area, and I guess Utah Valley too, you kind of like have like the two sides, right? You have BYU on one side, you have the University of Utah on the other side. BYU, of course, is a church school. The University of Utah is just like a classic, just regular old university. Um, and then when it comes to the news outlets in Utah, or at least the newspapers, you have two. You have the Deseret News, which is owned by the church, and it runs a lot of church articles and stuff. And then you have the Salt Lake Tribune, which is the more regular, just kind of newspaper. But because of the unique history and makeup of Utah and the Salt Lake area, essentially you have those two kind of warring with each other. So there's always been the huge rivalry between BYU and Utah, and that's like they call it the Holy War. Like usually they would play the last. Well, I think it was usually back when they were in the Mountain West Division in the WAC. The last football game of the year was BYU versus Utah, and they called it the Holy War, right? Because of course it's not like if you're LDS you just automatically go to BYU. You have a lot of people that have gone to the University of Utah, including Russell M. Nelson. He got his degree there, and then he did his residency at I guess the University of Minnesota. But he he got his doctorate here, or however it works, at the University of Utah, and then he actually came back and he was part of the faculty for the University of Utah. So it's not that the University of Utah is a bad school or anything like that. But I'm just kind of pointing out you have BYU versus Utah, Deseret News versus Salt Lake Tribune, and there's contention. There's like that divide, and Utah, the University of Utah, and the Salt Lake Tribune tend to be more secular and kind of go against BYU and the Deseret News. It's just like one of those weird things. Well, I think that this pattern kind of isn't just with BYU, how they've moved from the West now to the Midwest. With the University of Utah, they essentially kind of followed the same path as far as the conferences that they've been in. They started out independent, well, because like back then, I don't think that there were very many sports back in 1892. But they were in the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference, and then the Mountain States Conference. After that, the WAC. After that, the Mountain West Conference. And then in 2011, the same year that BYU went independent, the University of Utah went to the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 are these states right here: Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Colorado, and now Utah. And again, it's nothing against these West Coast people, and especially not the saints that live there, but these are the more worldly, secular, permissive states, right? So while BYU just made their move to the Midwest to play in this conference, Utah, 11 years ago, decided to go the opposite way, the more quote-unquote Babylon type conference. Definitely nothing against Arizona, because Arizona's a good state, but I think these ones in Colorado kind of struggle when it comes, as a whole, generally speaking, spiritually. So so it's just interesting. It's just a little observation. I don't think it necessarily means anything big, but I think that it is kind of part of a pattern, and maybe it's kind of a sign to some people. But we just see, there's a separation kind of story here, right? BYU and Utah always used to be in the same conferences, together, just like the wheat and the tares. And now, as we're approaching the second coming, and as society is dividing, and everyone's dividing up into tribes, and things are becoming more clear, and it's hard to just like remain neutral. You have to pick one side or another. That wider pattern, it seems to have extended to even these university athletics, potentially, with Utah going further west toward the more Babylon type places, and then BYU goes inward or to the east toward the Heartland. where things are still pretty spiritual and religious. So make of that whatever you will. Um, as for me, I'm really glad that I live here in Kansas. It's given me the opportunity to meet a lot of these people out here that haven't had very much exposure to the church. And I've done another video about that, just talking about how, I think that if you can, and if it's an answer to your prayer, think about leaving these heavy LDS communities, because there's people over here, people that live in these little towns over here, Dundee, Ellenwood, Great Bend, all over the country, that could benefit from your presence. When we moved here, um, where I live now, we began meeting people so quickly, and it felt like Heavenly Father had a hand in that. That it wasn't just like coincidence that we were meeting people at such a quick pace here in the town that I live in. And I think we need to be open to that, and it's part of doing it's part of doing member missionary work, and maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to move closer to Kansas City. If this is going to be the location of New Jerusalem, then maybe this is somewhere that you want to be. But that's highly personal. It's individual, and there's not going to be a big mass call from the church to move over here. But individually, maybe pray about it, think about it. I don't think it'd be a bad decision. And think about homesteading, because it's incredible. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. Go ahead and leave comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this, or if you think this is all just stupid, or if you think that it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure to like the video if you liked it, and hit the notification bell, and I'll talk to you guys later.